I walked into my own dining room holding a tray of freshly frosted cupcakes for my daughter's first birthday party, only to find my mother-in-law sitting at the head of the table, right in my designated chair. But it wasn't just that she had taken my seat. She was bouncing my daughter on her lap, and across her chest, she was wearing a custom-printed bright pink t-shirt that said in big, bold, glittering letters, "Mommy." Not Grandma, not Nana, Mommy. She looked up at me as I walked into the room, gave me this sickeningly sweet, triumphant smile, and literally tried to ice me out of my own child's milestone celebration. She thought she had won. She thought she was finally establishing her dominance. What she didn't realize was that just a few hours earlier, my husband and I had been standing in front of a family court judge, officially finalizing a strict restraining order based on her months of absolute, unhinged harassment. And the man in the dark suit standing quietly by the front door wasn't a party guest. He was a process server. But we are going to take this one step at a time. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Whispered Drama Stories. I am so incredibly happy that you are here with me today. If you are returning, welcome back to our cozy little corner. If you are new here, please take a moment to get comfortable. Grab a warm cup of coffee or tea, wrap yourself in your favorite blanket, and just breathe. This channel is a safe, quiet space where we dive into the very real, very painful realities of toxic family dynamics, boundary-stomping relatives, and the beautiful, deeply satisfying peace that comes from finally saying, "Enough is enough," and taking your power back. Today's story is a wild one. We are diving deep into the territory of toxic in-laws, specifically the dreaded boy-mom syndrome. Now, I want to be clear. There is absolutely nothing wrong with a mother loving her son. But there is a very dark, very toxic line that gets crossed when a mother views her son as her emotional husband and views his actual wife as an incubator and a rival. This is a story about what happens when a mother-in-law tries to literally replace a mother, and the absolute mama bear instinct that wakes up to shut it down. To fully grasp the sheer audacity of my mother-in-law, let's call her Brenda, you have to understand the foundation of her relationship with my husband, Ryan. When I first met Ryan, I thought I had hit the absolute jackpot. He was kind, empathetic, emotionally intelligent, and completely independent. He had moved out of his mother's house at 18, put himself through college, and built a great career. But as our relationship progressed, I started to notice the shadow that Brenda cast over his life. Brenda was a single mother. She had raised Ryan alone after his father left when he was a toddler. That is a massive accomplishment, and for a long time, I gave her a lot of grace because of it. But Brenda didn't just raise a son. She raised an emotional surrogate. She expected Ryan to be her handyman, her therapist, her financial advisor, and her primary source of happiness. When Ryan and I got serious, Brenda's subtle sabotage began. It wasn't overt screaming matches. It was the 1,000 tiny paper cuts of passive aggression. When we announced our engagement, she didn't say congratulations. She looked at Ryan, completely ignoring me, and sighed, "Well, I guess I'm losing my little boy. Who's going to take care of me now?" At our wedding, she wore a dress that was undeniably a shade of very pale ivory, and she sobbed hysterically during the mother-son dance as if she were at a funeral, clinging to Ryan so tightly he physically had to pry her off. But Ryan was amazing. I want to make that very clear, because in so many of these stories, the husband is spineless and lets his mother terrorize his wife. Not Ryan. Ryan had spent years in therapy untangling his mother's emotional enmeshment. He set boundaries. He told her when she was being inappropriate. But toxic people do not respect boundaries. They view them as a challenge, and Brenda simply shifted her narrative. In her mind, her perfect loving son hadn't suddenly developed healthy boundaries. No, her evil, controlling daughter-in-law had brainwashed him and stolen him away. Things were tense, but manageable for the first 2 years of our marriage. We kept her at arm's length. We saw her on major holidays, endured her passive-aggressive comments about my cooking or my career, and then went back to our peaceful lives. And then, I got pregnant. The moment we announced we were expecting our first child, it was as if a switch flipped in Brenda's brain. She didn't view my pregnancy as the expansion of our family. She viewed it as her second chance. She viewed my unborn child as her do-over baby. The boundary stomping escalated from annoying to completely suffocating almost overnight. She started calling Ryan 5 times a day, demanding details about my medical appointments. She would refer to the baby exclusively as my baby. Not my grandchild, but my baby. How is my baby doing today? What is my baby going to wear home from the hospital? At first, I tried to brush it off as overenthusiasm, but then the physical intrusion started. I came home from work one afternoon during my second trimester to find Brenda standing in the middle of our spare room, the room we were preparing to turn into a nursery. She had used a spare key Ryan had given her years ago for emergencies, let herself into our home, and brought a contractor with her. She was actively giving this strange man instructions on how to paint the walls and where she wanted the wainscoting installed. I was absolutely speechless. I stood in the doorway, staring at her as she held up paint swatches. "Oh, good, you're home," she said breezily, not even acknowledging the fact that she had broken into my house. "I decided the baby needs a classic cream and gold theme. I already ordered the crib. It's vintage." I didn't yell. I didn't cause a scene in front of the contractor. I simply told the man he needed to leave immediately. Then, I called Ryan. When Ryan got home, he took the spare key from his mother, told her she was completely out of line, and escorted her to her car. Brenda sobbed the entire time, wailing that we were depriving her of the joy of preparing for her baby. That was the turning point. Ryan changed the locks the next day, but the emotional siege was just beginning. Brenda became completely obsessed. She demanded to be in the delivery room. When we told her no, that it would just be Ryan and me, she threw an absolute tantrum, claiming it was her right as a grandmother to watch the baby take its first breath. When our daughter Lily was finally born, the postpartum period was supposed to be a beautiful, exhausting, intimate time for Ryan and me to bond with our new baby. Instead, it was an absolute nightmare. Brenda showed up at the hospital, uninvited, while I was still in the recovery room. She literally pushed past the nurses, walked right up to my bed, and without saying a word to me, reached down and tried to physically lift my newborn daughter out of my arms while I was actively trying to nurse her. "Give her to me," Brenda demanded, her eyes wide and fixated completely on the baby. "She wants her real mom. Look how she's crying." I pulled back so sharply I pulled an IV line. Ryan physically stepped between us, grabbed his mother by the shoulders and forced her out of the room. He banned her from the hospital for the rest of our stay. You would think that being physically removed from a maternity ward by your own son would be a wake-up call. For a normal person, it would be. For Brenda, it was a declaration of war. When we brought Lily home, Brenda's behavior shifted from intrusive to genuinely stalker-like. She would show up at our house unannounced at random hours of the day. Because the locks were changed, she would stand on the front porch and ring the doorbell incessantly. When I wouldn't answer, because I was exhausted, recovering from a C-section, and terrified of her, she would go around to the back of the house and peer through the windows, tapping on the glass if she saw me sitting in the living room with the baby. She started intercepting packages delivered to our porch. She would open gifts sent by my family, rewrap them, and claim they were from her. She flooded our social media with comments, taking photos I had posted of Lily, cropping me out of them completely, and reposting them to her own page with captions like, "The only 2 girls who matter," #mybaby, #momlife. The psychological toll this took on me was immense. Postpartum anxiety is already a heavy, heavy burden to carry. Your hormones are crashing, you are functioning on 0 sleep, and your sole biological focus is keeping this tiny human alive. Adding a deeply unstable, hostile woman who constantly implies you are an unfit mother and actively tries to rip your child from your arms. It broke me. I was constantly on edge. I started having panic attacks whenever I heard a car pull into our driveway. Ryan saw what was happening to me. He stepped up in a way that I will be grateful for until the day I die. He sent Brenda a formal certified letter stating that she was no longer welcome at our home, and that if she wanted to see Lily, it would be at a neutral public location, supervised by him for exactly 1 hour a month. And if she violated those terms, there would be no contact at all. For a few months, it seemed to work. Brenda hated the supervised visits. She would sit at the coffee shop, glaring at me, trying to whisper things to Lily like, "Don't worry, Gamma will save you from her soon." But Ryan would immediately shut it down and end the visit early. We thought we had a handle on the situation. We thought we had established a firm enough boundary to keep the crazy at bay. We were wrong. Because toxic people do not rest. They plot. And Brenda was plotting for the ultimate power grab. The event that finally shattered the glass and forced us into the legal system happened when Lily was about 10 months old. I had returned to work part-time, and we had hired a wonderful, highly recommended nanny named Maria to watch Lily 3 days a week at our house. Maria was a godsend. She was calm, professional, and adored our daughter. One Tuesday afternoon, I was sitting in my office when my phone rang. It was Maria. She sounded frantic, completely out of breath. "I'm so sorry to bother you," Maria said, her voice shaking. "But there is a woman here. She says she is Ryan's mother and she is demanding that I hand the baby over to her. She says she is taking Lily for the weekend." My blood ran completely cold. I stood up from my desk, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Maria, lock the doors. Do not let her in. I am calling the police, and I am on my way." I called Ryan, who immediately left his office, and then I called 911. By the time the police and I arrived at the house almost simultaneously, Brenda was on the front lawn, screaming at the top of her lungs, banging her fists against the heavy oak front door. When the officers approached her, she immediately started crying, playing the victim. She told the police that I was an abusive, neglectful mother who left her grandchild with a stranger, and that she, as the grandmother, had the legal right to take the child into protective custody. The police, thankfully, saw right through it. They checked my ID, spoke to a terrified Maria through the window, and told Brenda she needed to leave the premises immediately or she would be arrested for trespassing and disturbing the peace. Brenda glared at me, a look of pure, unadulterated venom. "You think you can keep my baby from me?" she spat right in front of the officers. "You are nothing. I am her real mother. I will get her back." She got in her car and drove away. Ryan and I sat on our couch that night, holding a sleeping Lily between us, completely shaken to our core. This wasn't just annoying anymore. This was a dangerous, delusional woman who was actively trying to kidnap our child. The very next morning, the situation escalated from terrifying to nuclear. At 8 a.m., there was a knock at our door. It wasn't Brenda. It was 2 social workers from Child Protective Services. Brenda had called CPS the moment she got home from her standoff with the police. She had filed a massive, entirely fabricated report claiming that I was using drugs, that Ryan was physically abusive, and that Lily was malnourished and living in squalor. The social workers were doing their job. They had to investigate the claims. They came in, inspected our spotless home, looked in our fully stocked fridge, and gently examined our perfectly healthy, babbling 10-month-old daughter. Within 20 minutes, they realized the call was completely malicious. They apologized for the intrusion, made a note in their file that the report was unfounded and likely retaliatory, and left. But the damage was done. The sheer trauma of having state agencies investigate my fitness as a mother because of a vindictive, delusional woman was the absolute final straw. The mama bear instinct didn't just wake up, it roared. I looked at Ryan. He looked at me. There was no discussion needed. We weren't going to send another sternly worded text message. We weren't going to set another boundary for her to trample over. We were going to the courthouse. We hired a phenomenal family law attorney. We handed over ring camera footage of Brenda peering through our windows. We provided the police report from the trespassing incident with the nanny. We submitted the documented proof of the false, malicious CPS report. Our lawyer filed an emergency petition for a permanent restraining order, citing harassment, stalking, and an active threat to the safety and well-being of our child. The legal process is notoriously slow, and the temporary order was granted immediately, but the hearing for the permanent order was scheduled for a few months out, landing, ironically, on the exact same week as Lily's first birthday. For those 2 months, it was completely silent. Brenda had been served with the temporary order, which legally barred her from coming within 500 feet of us, our home, or our daughter. We thought she was finally listening to the law. We thought the silence meant she had given up. But as Lily's first birthday approached, I started getting a strange, uneasy feeling in the pit of my stomach. We had planned a small, beautiful party at our house. Just our close friends, my parents, and Maria the nanny. We obviously didn't send Brenda an invitation, but Brenda didn't need an invitation. In her deeply fractured reality, she was the guest of honor, and she was planning the ultimate public ambush. The week of Lily's first birthday was a complete emotional whirlwind. On one hand, Ryan and I were absolutely exhausted from the stress of the previous months, but we were also buzzing with excitement. Surviving the first year of parenthood is a massive milestone under normal circumstances. But for us, it felt like we had survived a literal war zone. We wanted Saturday to be perfect. We rented a huge bounce house for the older kids, ordered massive trays of food from our favorite local deli, and I had spent 2 days meticulously baking and decorating 3 dozen vanilla bean cupcakes with delicate pink buttercream frosting. But before we could celebrate on Saturday, we had to get through Friday morning. Friday was the date of the final hearing for the permanent restraining order. Walking into that family courthouse felt like walking into a refrigerator. The air was sterile, cold, and heavy with tension. Ryan held my hand so tightly my fingers were numb. We sat at the petitioner's table with our lawyer, a stack of heavily tabbed binders sitting in front of us containing every text message, every Ring camera video, and the official CPS clearance report. And then, Brenda walked in. She didn't hire a lawyer. In her mind, she didn't need one. She firmly believed that any rational judge would look at her, see a devoted, loving grandmother, and instantly recognize that Ryan and I were the real villains of the story. She wore a conservative floral dress, carried a vintage handbag, and offered the judge a sweet, trembling smile as she sat down at the respondent's table. The hearing was a bloodbath, and I don't use that term lightly. Our lawyer didn't even have to raise his voice. He simply presented the facts, chronologically and methodically. He played the video of Brenda screaming on our lawn. He handed the judge the police report. And then he presented the CPS document. When the judge, a stern, no-nonsense woman with absolute zero tolerance for family drama, looked at the CPS report, the temperature in the room dropped another 10 degrees. The judge looked directly at Brenda and asked, "Ma'am, did you initiate this call to Child Protective Services claiming these parents were using narcotics?" Brenda stood up, clutching her pearls. "Your Honor, I was simply concerned for my baby. A mother knows when her baby is in danger, and I—" "Stop right there," the judge interrupted, her voice cracking like a whip. "You are not the mother of this child. You are the grandmother. And weaponizing a state agency designed to protect abused children, simply because you are upset about your son's boundaries, is not only a waste of taxpayer resources, it is a form of domestic harassment." Brenda tried to argue. She tried to cry. She tried to spin a narrative about how I was alienating her, but the judge was completely done. She granted us a 5-year permanent restraining order. It barred Brenda from coming within 500 feet of me, Ryan, Lily, our home, our places of employment, and Lily's daycare. It was an absolute ironclad legal shield. The judge signed the order and handed it to the clerk to be stamped. But before the bailiff could officially serve Brenda with the final, stamped copies, which is the legal requirement to make the permanent terms immediately enforceable by police, Brenda threw a massive theatrical fit. She grabbed her handbag, screamed that the court was corrupt, and literally stormed out of the courtroom doors, disappearing down the hallway before anyone could stop her. Our lawyer sighed, packed up his briefcase, and told us not to worry. The temporary order was still actively in place until the permanent one was served. He told us he was going to hire a private process server, a professional whose entire job is to track people down and hand them legal documents, to find Brenda that afternoon and formally serve her the final paperwork. We left the courthouse feeling £1,000,000 lighter. We had won. The law was on our side. We went home, turned off our phones, and threw ourselves into decorating for the party. Saturday morning dawned bright, sunny, and incredibly peaceful. By 1 o'clock in the afternoon, our house was filled with laughter, the smell of good food, and the beautiful, chaotic energy of a dozen toddlers running around the backyard. My parents were manning the grill. Ryan's friends were playing lawn games. It was the exact, perfect celebration we had envisioned, because we had so many guests moving constantly between the backyard and the living room. The front door was unlocked. We didn't think anything of it. We felt safe. The court had protected us. Around 3 o'clock, it was time for the cake smash. I left the crowded backyard and walked through the sliding glass doors into the quiet, cool kitchen to get the cupcakes I had baked. I carefully arranged them on a beautiful wooden tray, humming a little song to myself. I picked up the tray, turned around, and walked through the archway into the formal dining room. I stopped dead in my tracks. My heart didn't just drop. It felt like it completely stopped beating. Sitting at the head of my dining room table, in the beautiful tufted chair I had specifically bought for myself, was Brenda. But it wasn't just that she had snuck into my house. It was what she was doing. She was bouncing my 1-year-old daughter Lily on her lap, and across her chest, stretching over the fabric of a bright, glaringly pink t-shirt, was the word Mommy, written in massive, silver glitter letters. The sheer psychological violence of that image physically took my breath away. She had snuck through the front door while everyone was in the backyard, found Lily wandering in the living room with the other kids, scooped her up, and sat down at the head of the table like she owned the house. Like she owned my child. She looked up at me as I stood frozen in the archway holding the tray of cupcakes. The smile she gave me was the most chilling, victorious smirk I have ever seen on a human face. She was crying, Brenda said softly, her voice dripping with fake concern. She wanted her real mommy, so I came to get her. For a split second, the world tilted on its axis. My brain screamed at me to drop the cupcakes, lunge across the table, and physically tear her apart. The adrenaline flooding my system was so intense my vision actually blurred. But then my eyes darted to the front entryway, just over Brenda's shoulder. Standing quietly in the foyer, silhouetted against the bright afternoon sunlight streaming through the open front door, was a man in a dark, nondescript suit. He held a thick manila envelope in his hand. It was the private process server. He had tracked Brenda's car from her house, following her all the way to our neighborhood. When she had bypassed the driveway and parked 2 streets over to sneak into our house undetected, he had parked right behind her and followed her to the front door. And just seconds after she slipped inside, Ryan had walked through the living room to grab some napkins, seen the process server standing on the porch, and quietly let him in. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't give Brenda the explosive, hysterical reaction she was so desperately trying to provoke. I realized in that exact moment that the trap she thought she had set for me was actually closing perfectly around her. I set the tray of cupcakes down on the kitchen counter very, very gently. I took 2 steps into the dining room. Ryan appeared in the archway from the living room. When he saw his mother sitting there in that psychotic mommy shirt holding our daughter, his face turned the color of ash. But he didn't say a word. He just walked with absolute terrifying purpose over to the head of the table. Brenda looked up at Ryan, her triumphant smile faltering for just a second. "Ryan, sweetie, look. We are a family again. Just you, me, and our baby." Ryan didn't argue. He reached down, placed his large hands firmly under Lily's arms, and scooped her out of Brenda's lap in one swift, fluid motion. Lily babbled happily, completely oblivious to the tension, and grabbed a handful of Ryan's shirt. "Ryan, give her back!" Brenda shrieked, suddenly standing up, the chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. "She needs me. You can't do this." As she stood up, the man in the dark suit stepped out of the shadows of the foyer and into the dining room. He walked right up to the side of the table, standing mere inches from Brenda. "Brenda?" the man asked, his voice completely neutral and professional. Brenda whipped her head around to look at him. Because he was wearing a suit, and because her brain was completely untethered from reality, she assumed he was one of Ryan's business associates attending the party. She immediately plastered on a fake, polite smile, smoothing down her glittery mommy shirt. "Yes," she said, adopting her sweet, high-pitched voice. "I'm Ryan's mother, and Lily's mother, really. Can I help you?" The man didn't smile back. He simply lifted the thick manila envelope and dropped it directly onto the table right in front of her. It landed with a heavy, satisfying thud. "You have been served," the process server said clearly. "These are the finalized documents for your 5-year permanent restraining order, signed by the judge yesterday morning." Brenda stared at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake. "Furthermore," the process server continued, taking a step back and pulling a small notepad out of his pocket, "I am legally documenting that I have served you these papers while you are actively standing inside the petitioner's home, in direct, flagrant violation of the order." The color completely drained from Brenda's face. The reality of the situation finally shattered her delusion. She wasn't the guest of honor. She wasn't reclaiming her do-over baby. She was a trespasser caught completely red-handed by an officer of the court. Before Brenda could even open her mouth to scream, the wail of police sirens began to echo down our quiet suburban street. Ryan had called 911 the absolute second he saw Brenda's car parked down the block, right before he let the process server inside. Because there was already an active restraining order on file, the police response was immediate. 2 squad cars pulled up onto our front lawn, their lights flashing brightly against the living room windows. Several of our party guests, who had started to wander inside looking for the cake, completely froze in the hallway, watching the scene unfold in stunned silence. 3 officers walked through our open front door. They took one look at Brenda, looked at Ryan, and then looked down at the manila envelope on the table. "Ma'am," the lead officer said, placing his hand resting casually on his utility belt, "we have multiple reports of you violating an active court order. Put your hands behind your back." Brenda absolutely lost her mind. The sweet, victimized grandmother act vanished completely. She started screaming, crying, and thrashing. She pointed at me, shrieking that I was a witch, that I had ruined her life, that I was stealing her child. She pointed to her glittery shirt, screaming, "Look at my shirt. I am the mother. She belongs to me." It took 2 officers to physically restrain her. They cuffed her hands behind her back right there in my dining room. As they marched her out the front door, past a crowd of our completely silent, wide-eyed friends and family, she continued to scream obscenities into the beautiful Saturday afternoon air. Ryan and I stood in the dining room, holding Lily between us. The house was dead quiet except for the fading sound of Brenda screaming from the back of the police cruiser. The process server tipped his head to us. "Have a good afternoon, folks," he said simply before turning around and walking out the door. For a long minute, nobody moved. The tension in the house was so thick you could choke on it. And then, my dad, who had walked in from the backyard halfway through the arrest holding a pair of barbecue tongs, looked around the room, cleared his throat and said, "So, who is ready for some cupcakes?" The entire room let out a collective, massive breath. A few people nervously chuckled. And just like that, the spell was broken. The storm cloud that had been hanging over our entire first year of parenthood was finally, permanently gone. We went to the backyard. We sang happy birthday to our beautiful daughter. She absolutely destroyed a vanilla cupcake, and we laughed harder than we had in months. It was the best party of my life. Brenda's legal fallout was severe. Because she was caught violating the order by a court-appointed process server, and because she actively resisted arrest, she didn't just get a slap on the wrist. She spent the weekend in a holding cell. When she finally went before a criminal judge, she was sentenced to a lengthy period of supervised probation, mandatory and intensive psychiatric evaluation, and heavily monitored community service. We haven't seen or heard from her in over 3 years. The peace in our home is absolute. Ryan is an incredible father. Lily is a thriving, happy 4-year-old, and we are completely, wonderfully boring. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today and listening to this absolute roller coaster of a story. I know how insane it sounds, but if you have ever dealt with a truly enmeshed, toxic mother-in-law, you know exactly how fast things can escalate when you threaten their sense of control. I really want to hear your thoughts on this one. Have you ever had an in-law try to cross a massive, unforgivable boundary when it came to your children? What was the moment you finally put your foot down and stopped trying to keep the peace? Get down in the comments and share your stories with us. I read absolutely every single one, and this community thrives on validating each other. If this story resonated with you, or if you just enjoy the satisfaction of seeing a boundary stomper get exactly what they deserve, please make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It tells the algorithm that this is a space worth sharing, and it helps us grow. Thank you again for being here. Keep your boundaries strong, and never let anyone make you feel crazy for protecting your peace. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you in the next video.